Hello, everyone. Welcome to Talking Logistics, where we have conversations with thought leaders and newsmakers in the supply chain logistics industry. It's my great pleasure to welcome to today's program Evan Puzey, who is a CMO at Kewill. And today we're going to talk about not your father's TMS, important questions to consider when evaluating and selecting a next generation TMS. Now, this is a topic that, I started seeing gaining momentum last year, where folks are beginning to question, whether we need to think differently about a TMS and the capability that a TMS provides in light of the changing transportation environment out there. And that's really at the heart of the conversation today that I'm going to have with Evan. So I'm very happy and excited to have Evan on the program. So Evan, thank you very much for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks, Adrian. And appreciate you taking the time to have a talk to us about this today.
So, Evan, before we kind of dive into this topic, whenever I have a new guest on the program, I always like, to know how they got involved in the supply chain logistics industry. So, why don't you briefly, tell us a little bit about your career path, how and why you got involved in supply chain logistics, and what your current role and responsibilities are there at Kewill.
Right, Adrian. Well, it's an interesting story, I guess, or certainly for me anyway. But I heard at a conference recently, anyone around my age, and I'm not going to give anything away there, happens to be in supply chain by accident, because it wasn't a university course or advertised jobs when I fell into the role. I guess I came through industry. I'd worked in a couple of different industries before getting into the software space. So come out of having done planning, forecasting, warehousing and execution roles. And then I guess like a number of people in the software world, I ended up implementing a system and got approached by the then demand planning software vendor to come and join them and help them get other companies to do it. So in about the last 20 years now, I've lived in 3 different regions. Helped a number of companies in about 35 different countries across 5 regions now globally, with either implementing, using, selling, buying different parts of the supply chain software world. I started on the planning side for the first 10 years or so of my career in supply chain, and I've spent the last 10 years in the execution side. I think one of the things that really attracted me to begin with is that being in a supply chain role allows you to see all the different parts of a business, because it really is the center of what happens with most businesses today.
Yeah, that's a great point at the end there. I mean, I always go back to this great quote that the former CEO of UPS made, it was probably going back 15 years now, where he said, logistics is the business plan, right? And in many ways, kind of your logistics strategy and your supply chain strategy is so tightly woven, and that's especially true today with your business plan, that the success of both are completely dependent on each other. So great background, great journey into supply chain and logistics. So let's now kind of dive into the topic. Not your father's TMS. I mean, that phrase kind of implies that it's not your father's transportation operations either. So how is transportation management different today?
So I think that it's a great topic to talk about, because it's something most businesses today that have to move goods is having a conversation within their own management teams and across the business. I think the reality is that, if we think about it, most companies are not their father's companies today, where we bought locally, sold locally, where we, maybe talked on the phone a little bit and, sent, snail mail, as we call it today. With the globe opening up, with many customers of ours, many companies today procuring goods from multiple locations around the world, and most of those companies now trying to sell those goods in multiple countries around the world. We have a much more global, much more complex, we have much longer supply chains, and all of that creates, a bigger, more complex set of transportation issues. And, I think many companies today are looking at this as becoming a big problem for them to manage manually, as we had done in the past. let's go down to the warehouse, look at the orders, let's get the drivers to take the printed out orders and between them decide who's going to deliver what to where today based on their knowledge. And in today's world, we hear stories on a daily basis about, lack of availability of drivers, so how do we automate that process so we don't have to rely on one individual's knowledge? How do we create a scenario where we can grow our business without having to, wait to hire people who have that domain expertise, but can take operators who can then drive our business further? How do we leverage those systems to enable us to quickly get up to speed with inbound transport from a new region or country and outbound transport to a new country or region? So I think, what businesses face today is a series of issues that we've not seen in the past. They've been growing on us. And as, most organizations are very sales and marketing driven, quite often, it's the logistics guys, the guys at the back of the business who find out today that we've got to ship goods to a new market tomorrow. And, that process has been going on in the business for some time. And I think it's that connectedness that, systems allow us to achieve. And hopefully as people, address this issue, that, transport is maturing, and companies need to mature their systems and processes around that. We can also start to think beyond just pure transport into the other areas of the business that are connected to the logistics and transport, the warehousing, the procurement, the yard, the manufacturing, those sort of things as well.
No, certainly, when you talk about complexity, that's we're certainly working in a much more complex environment, and also a much more dynamic and fast-changing environment. I know when I speak to a lot of supply chain logistics professionals, that's the number one challenge that they face is not so much keeping up with change, but keeping up with the rapid pace of change. And one of the things I've talked about recently is that companies can't afford to succeed despite anymore, right? To be able to succeed despite having poor visibility of their supply chains, despite not having good systems in place to automate some of those processes, or to optimize or analyze in more smart ways, kind of the key decisions that they need to make on a day-to-day basis. So I think just to echo kind of some of the points that you just made there, I think absolutely. I think we're at a point now that everyone needs to work smarter, and part of that implies technology enabling the ability to respond to these changing needs. Kind of related to that, I mean, over the years, there's been a lot of talk about collaboration and end-to-end visibility, which, relatively few companies have been able to achieve. And certainly when we talk about this complexity and being able to succeed in this new environment, those are things that are going to be critical. So the question is, why have collaboration and end-to-end visibility been so difficult to implement and achieve?
Yeah, thanks, Adrian. That's a great question. And I think in the 20 years I've been in the software business, at least every other year, supply chain and collaboration and visibility comes back as a mantra that we've all got to drive towards. And I'm sure I could go back and find presentations that are at least 15 years old talking about, how next year everybody's going to be, connected and, we'll have end-to-end supply chain control and visibility. I think the reality in the last 10 to 15 years is that everybody's wanted to achieve that. But when you look across your supply chain, many companies today, if not all companies today, will find they have, a large network of, suppliers and logistics partners and customers, and they're all of different shapes and sizes. So, what we're seeing is today that, by looking at your supply network, by looking and understanding that you have some very large partners who probably have, advanced enterprise software and integration capabilities. You probably have some medium-sized companies that are maybe part of the way there, and have, a small number of people internally in an IT organization that might be able to help us get connected. But we probably have the largest group, which is the small to medium enterprise. They have, usually very little IT capability internally. and they struggled to be able to afford in the past those enterprise level IT capabilities. So I think the real impact that's happened in the last couple of years is that pretty much everybody we do business with today has some level of electronic connectivity, because having a phone is great, but if I have to ring you every time I need an update, it's inefficient. I'm going back to a manual process. I'm having to remember to call you, or you're having to remember to call me. What we want to do is provide the right level of solution and interaction. I think the capabilities of being able to get onto a web page and enter data for somebody who may be out in the field with a tablet or a phone, and a smartphone, and maybe a mobile app. All of those things. So everybody now having the capability to be online. And I think the ability now with most systems providers providing multiple channels for connectivity, be it the smartphone, the tablet, maybe it's send a text or pick up an email, maybe it's online, maybe it's systems to systems integration. This whole Internet of Things where most people have a device they can get to is really creating an environment today that should help us deliver the benefits and that entire network visibility and collaboration capability that as we said at the start, companies have been pursuing now for one if not 2 decades.
Just to build upon that, I mean, you touched upon this subject as well last year in a guest commentary on Talking Logistics, where you talked about convergence. Why don't you share a little bit about what you meant by that convergence and what's happening today to bring that convergence closer to reality?
Yes, so I think there's the word convergence becoming more commonly used today. And in particular in our space, we talk about supply chain execution convergence. And what that means really is that to begin with, a company needs to look inside its own organization and realize that every facet of the supply chain probably today works as individual silos. So, we'll have a transportation planning team that's looking to get the optimum transportation plan. And then we'll have a warehousing team that's trying to optimize their warehouse. And we have a yard team that's trying to optimize the yard. And sometimes by optimizing one piece, divorced from understanding what's going on with the other pieces, we end up with an overall plan that's not completely optimized. So we use this word and becoming much more common in the marketplace around convergence. And to converge internally in a business and bring the different silos together and connect their plans, so that when I make a decision in transportation, that my colleagues in warehousing or colleagues in manufacturing understand what might be the impact on them, on procurement, on my supplier inbound, and therefore my distribution guys shipping outbound. And try and get those different silos of people operating as one single silo, with all of those plans being shared and worked upon together. And once you do that internally, you can gain significant benefit. But what it may mean is we need to get the systems connected, and that we may need to build a set of processes that allows all the individual players to actually connect. Now, just on the internal piece, most companies today don't just have an internal supply chain. They rely on other third parties for manufacturing and sourcing goods, for kitting goods and bringing, goods together to cross-dock as part of our delivery, and, third party, express or parcel carriers to get it right down to the consumer's door. So once you've got that internal convergence problem solved, then start to look at how you can leverage an integrated and an external convergence program that starts to get each of those supply network partners engaged in your overall process. And I think that's where we then start to look at linking convergence back to the visibility and collaboration. One of the things we worked on late last year was what we called the sort of 5 A's of visibility. And the process we thought through there was around being able to alert, assess, act, analyze, and advise. And that's the 5 A's. And what we're talking about there is the first thing we need to do is alert people. Because whether you're internal to my organization or external, once I get that process agreed in place, I don't really want to be spending an awful lot of time concentrating on those orders that are today are on track, going to be delivered on time or received on time, or I've got the stock. I want to concentrate on the exceptions, the ones that have a problem. And I want to fast track the people I have internally to those exact problems rather than having them sort of go line by line to find them. We want them to have the capability to actually assess what that problem is and collaboratively work together with other people internally and externally to our business to assess what the best solution may be. And then, we want to be able to act. So it's pointless finding, what the problem is and knowing what the solutions might be if we don't then implement. But part of implementing may require us to work with the supplier to make a change. So rather than shipping, X goods to Y location, I now want to split that, and I need some goods to go, air to this customer direct, and the rest of the shipment to come to my DC, and I'll follow, the rest of my standard process. We want to be able to analyze what caused the problem. So after the fact, and we've got a happy customer because they got their goods in a timely fashion, let's go back and look at what caused that problem. Was it a one-off? Was it something I need to refine my process, enhance my systems, train my people better to be able to cope with those different situations? And then once we've done that analysis, let's advise everybody about what changes or improvements we're going to make. So I think, these are different layers. I think we want to converge internally so we get improvement. We want to converge then externally. But all of these things, as early in my career, I was a consultant helping people sort of implement these kind of programs and solutions. So I think my final bit of advice is, systems are one part of the solution. We've got to be realistic that you've got to take these in sort of slow, edible chunks, baby steps sometimes we talk about, and work through a program of, continuous improvement. Because, a blue sky approach on this is, let's just buy one big system that does everything and it'll solve our problem tomorrow when we implement it, is fraught with danger based on past experience. So, taking good, easy steps and building up on the systems and the process front gives us a much better chance of success in the future.
Now, I'm a big, and I agree, breaking down those silos, both internally as well as facilitating communication and collaboration with external parties, I think is critical, in all of this. And one of the things that, has kind of been my soapbox issue or topic for many years now has been kind of the role that what I call supply chain operating networks can play in that. And kind of another way to look at a supply chain operating network is really a cloud-based or software as a service-based type of platform, that kind of brings all these trading partners together, both internally and externally. What role do you see in terms of cloud or software as a service, playing here? Do you see that evolution that we're seeing today in terms of more cloud-based applications and platforms helping out in this?
Yes, definitely. I think if we go back to where we talked about if you look across the supply network, there's different sizes of partners, and each one of those partners, even sometimes indifferent to their size, have different capabilities in IT and systems, in connectivity. I think what cloud will allow the entire network to do is take those companies, usually the small to medium players, and allow them without the sort of in the past large upfront investment cost to take on enterprise level systems, or systems with enterprise level capabilities, I guess is the best way to put it, and will allow many more players to actually take on those systems and get them implemented quicker and faster. Now I think when we talk about cloud, we need to sort of split the discussion into cloud as a technology enabler, e.g., cloud usually means that the systems are delivered to me online. I don't have to buy the hardware. I don't have to have internal IT people to set the hardware up, to install the software and run it for me. I find a vendor who takes those capabilities away, takes on those requirements delivers those capabilities, to the end customer. But similarly, if you just took the same system and put it on somebody else's hardware, you may face the same implementation issues of having to go through a full-blown configured, customized implementation. So I think what people, as they look at the cloud opportunity, need to look at is, one, the technical IT side of it. It takes, the whole requirement for the hardware, etc., away. It reduces my upfront cost because usually a cloud or SaaS-based system gives me the capability to pay in much more of a transactional or a subscription style model. But also look for, as part of that cloud offering, some sort of templated model to start with. What I've seen a lot in the past is having written RFPs to buy software and having received hundreds of RFPs now for people to buy software. When people go to that RFP process, they tend to look at, let's have a blue sky approach. What's everything we can think we'd ever want to do in TMS or WMS, and let's make sure that we buy a system that can do everything. The reality being is that, what they need to do is probably a small percentage of those things, but with a newer system enabling, much more best practice process, we can get carried away sometime and lose our focus on, actually, it's the old 80-20 rule. Let's take, 20% of those requirements and do them extremely well immediately. Then let's go back to our, management team or our board and say, look what we've done. We spent a small amount of money. We're delivering improvement. It's 3 to 6 months down the track, and I'm already showing you return. Now it'll allow me to spend, an incremental amount of more money, and I'll enable some more features, right? Or I'll enable another module, or I'll add another feature on. So I think what we're starting to see is much more mature and informed buyers leveraging the cost advantage, the advantage of cloud-based solutions, but also wanting to couple that with, hey, you guys deliver this software to hundreds of companies, right? Can't you take that delivery experience and help me leverage that by taking a pre-configured solution for my industry, my vertical, whatever it may be, so that I can get up and running very quickly, and then having shown return and got a success, let's leverage that success now and slowly add features on or configure where my business wants its special sauce that makes me slightly different to my competitors. But let's get that core piece right. And I'm sure you've seen examples of that, in your past as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think overall, cloud is, forcing companies to, approach the way they think about software applications in terms of what they need, how they're going to deploy it, how they're going to pay for it, and kind of that roadmap that they build. And I think you're absolutely right. I think, for one of the key benefits that I see is the ability to really, implement and realize value on a much more incremental approach, right? Where the savings from the initial implementation can be rolled into, additional rollouts of modules or capabilities, and really being able to align both short-term requirements and needs, and while also keeping the long-term perspective in sight and being able to work towards that over time. So I think, absolutely. So kind of taking that and kind of focusing it now on kind of TMS. I mean, what differentiates, a next generation TMS from your father's TMS? In other words, what important capabilities should companies look for in a TMS to help them manage today's more complex and dynamic transportation requirements?
Yeah, so if we think back where we started in the conversation about, your father's business being different to the business we all work in today, it was much more local. So the requirements on a TMS usually were probably single mode, probably reduced number of vendors, probably, because I didn't have to deal with the complexity of a global supply chain with, air freight, sea freight, road freight, with local delivery capabilities, because I didn't have to deal with a consumer that, now wants the omni-channel environment. They don't want right product, right place, right time anymore. They want any product, any place, any time. So I think when you start to look at, today's TMS, we're starting to see vendors in the market like ourselves offer true multimodal TMS. So instead of having multiple systems or actually not being able to, get systems to manage it, having to rely on a third party to do certain segments, we're starting to see, today's TMS be multimodal. Give us the capability to look across all of those modes when we not only plan, but when we also execute. Because, I guess, best laid plans and all those things, we made a plan yesterday based on what we thought we were going to do, but when we got up this morning, usually something's changed and we have to react. So I think you want to look at a system that allows you to manage all the different modes, air, sea, road, barge, rail, down to, individual parcel, and I'm sure somewhere in the world these days it's, down to moped or push bike, delivering goods along the way. I don't think that complexity is going to go away soon, if at all, ever. So look for a solution that can deal with multiple modes, preferably in one application. Look for one that's exception driven, right? Enable yourself to take the expertise that the individual planners that do that work manually or on less sophisticated systems where they're having to use their expertise, their experience to override systems or enhance their own systems. Get them and get through a program of taking that information and putting it into a system. And that enables us and enables them to get away from the mundane manual type work and become much more value adding to the business by becoming more proactive than reactive and spending a lot more time thinking about how can I get convergence, how can I work with my colleagues to get an overall umbrella approach to execution in our environment, so that you can provide a lot more return and value to the business.
It won't be long, I guess, before one of those additional modes will be drones, considering all the buzz and development that's been going on in that area as well. So maybe that might be something you might add in what a next generation TMS will be the capability to also ship by drone. Can you give a use case example of how kind of a next generation TMS can enable new or smarter processes, and what kind of benefits companies can achieve?
Yeah, I guess there's a couple of different scenarios we could talk through. One in particular that we have sort of a global fashion retailer sort of leveraging today is that in the past they were bringing goods in from China, putting them into DCs in the US, and then fulfilling their online orders out of a DC in the United States, which obviously means, I've got multiple steps in the supply chain, I've got multiple stocking points, etc. What they've been able to do is leveraging that multimodal approach is actually say, look, why don't we take those orders that we would have, picked and fulfilled in a DC in the US? Why don't we look at the opportunity to actually have those packaged, labeled, and ready for express, to drop into the express carrier channel? Why don't we have that done at the manufacturing site, on behalf of us by our manufacturer in China? Why don't we then consolidate those, airship them into the US, and at the airport actually then break those that bulk load down into the individual networks of the express carriers and deliver them direct to our consumer? The consumer actually knows no different because, as far as they're concerned, the goods are coming. They've got, that retailer's branding and logos on them. They've got the local express carrier's barcoding and note numbers on them and those sort of things. But what it allows us to do is take out, major steps. It allows us to take out major stocking points, but allows us to actually deliver the same service level and fulfillment capabilities, by leveraging that one system that now has a view across all the different stages and can help us see that end to end and find the best approach to delivering it. That's one example. We have a second example with sort of an automotive original equipment manufacturer, finished vehicles, who had outsourced the movement of those vehicles into down to local dealership level. And what they'd found over time was that in-sourced sort of approach that had been outsourced, to their view, had become overly expensive. So what they were looking to do was take that over. Of course, whenever you do that kind of change in a business, not only is there a cost in change, but there's also a pain of change. And one of the factors they were trying to address was, in looking at changing either to another logistics service provider or to bring it in-house, this need to have integrated systems they saw as one of the big limiters on being able to change and change quickly. So what they wanted to do was future-proof themselves from that pain of change. So they decided to actually take ownership of those systems. So they purchased systems from Kewill, which allowed them to say, okay, anybody who wants to be part of my supply chain, who wants to be a logistics service provider, can actually provide, the yards or the vehicle, the truck transport, vehicles in this scenario. But you're going to leverage my own system. And therefore, at the end of the contractual period, if you haven't delivered the service I wanted that my customers demanded, now I've got a much less painful change because I can find another, truck transport company and just get them to take on that contract using my systems. I don't have to go and reintegrate. I don't have to go and assess your systems and make sure it can give me the same level of capabilities. So there's some different dynamics that companies are looking for in the marketplace today. And I think that's one of the things you need to look at when looking at a system. Is this a system for today? Is it for the future? Is it a system that maybe I can use today, but I can see a 5 to 10 year path of growing with that system and that system growing with my business so that, I don't get 2 years down the track and say, well, we invested a lot of money, but I'm now outgrowing the system and I need to go through a whole, re-implementation. So, we see some different dynamics. Different industries are looking at things differently. But, those are a couple of the case studies I can think of that we've seen recently that might be of interest, to people out there in the marketplace today and how, they might be seeing similar questions in their own business.
No, great examples. Kind of building off of that. I mean, is the business case for a TMS kind of still centered on kind of reducing, transportation costs and improving, service levels, or are there other factors that, companies should also take into consideration, especially when they're kind of making their case to the CEO and the CFO?
Yeah, I think, traditionally when we looked at justifying a TMS, it's always been about, what transport costs can we save? I think if we continue to just look at a TMS as a standalone application in our business, we potentially wedge ourselves into a corner that really does get down to that. But I think what, if business can look at it, TMS as being part of a supply chain execution platform that provides visibility, that provides collaboration, that allows us to do, the order fulfillment process as part of that process, that allows us the capability to access a much broader network of carriers than maybe we've done in the past manually, that allows us to engage in things like freight matching. We have goods going from A to B. Can this TMS actually help me find other, companies out there that are also moving similar goods from A to B and start to consolidate loads, across multiple parties. And I think what businesses need to do today is look at TMS as not just being a standalone TMS and therefore only impacting the transportation, but if we think about it as part of that supply chain execution platform in a business, as being converged with other parts of the business, then there's a whole lot of other benefits we can deliver around, the visibility, the collaboration, improved processes across the warehouse manufacturing, TMS, etc. And, as I say, just expanded network. I might have been talking to, the 10 trucking companies, I've used in the past, but actually there was an 11th one out there that was much more efficient and effective, gave me the customer service I want, but at a better cost, because their dynamics was that actual leg was a backload for them. So for them, it was great. We brought together companies that had two issues that actually could, net each other out. And I think there's some of the capabilities, that we're seeing in today's TMSs that you wouldn't have seen in the past, that give value add, that, go beyond just I can cut 10% of my transport cost.
Yes, I mean, to underscore your point there, one of the things that I've been, telling people and folks is that, and we've seen this really over the past couple of years, that logistics and specifically transportation is truly becoming finally a competitive differentiator for companies, right? So when you see all the activity taking place today in terms of same day delivery and all the different models that companies are experimenting with there, and omni-channel, as you brought up, talked about earlier, where transportation, logistics, really not only impacts, and doing that efficiently not only impacts the cost side of the equation, but can also play a very important role on driving top line growth and driving sales and in driving, increasing market share, because that is now, particularly for consumer oriented industries, delivery, getting that product when they want it, whether it's same day or next day or within a very time definite window. That's kind of what the expectations are today. And so I think that's another kind of way to kind of look at the value of a TMS, not only from a cost perspective, but also from a, helping to drive sales, competitive differentiation, and drive market share. Evan, we're kind of running short on time here, so I just want to get to my last question now, and kind of as a way to, wrap up. I mean, what questions should companies ask themselves as they're evaluating, their requirements for a TMS and, the different solutions out there to make sure that they're making an informed selection?
That's a great question about questions. So I think the response I'd give to people is, firstly, be very sure about what it is you're trying to solve in your business and what advantages you're seeking, and make sure that that's a short list, not as I mentioned earlier, this blue sky approach. Let's solve every problem with this new system, because quite often what we see is that businesses are upgrading systems for a number of reasons, and in reality, if they can just get and do, those core components better, faster, more efficiently, more effectively, more exception driven, then that's the real win. Okay, and that's where the real benefits are. I think if people are going to look for TMS today, think multimodal. If your business isn't operating either inbound globally or outbound globally today, I think you'd want to be aspiring to do that, because there's a big wide world out there that you could be either procuring from or selling goods to. And, make sure you have the capability for that system to grow with your business, to change with your business. Look at things like carrier network, right? One of the big advantages is, you might be shipping to, 3 states in the US today, and when you get to the 4th, 5th, 10th, 26th, 50th, you're going to need to leverage more carriers, right? Because, generally speaking, those carriers cover certain geographical segments, and when you go, regional or global, you're going to want to be able to leverage that network. You're going to want to be able to, assess their capability to deliver, to provide satisfactory service, but also mirroring that against the cost, because sometimes always, finding the cheapest carrier isn't necessarily the right thing. It's finding the one that's most efficient and most effective, because the cheapest guy who doesn't get your goods to the customer's not going to come back and buy him any more goods, and that's not great. I think about outside pure TMS. TMS is about the physical transportation of goods, but you can't transport goods these days without usually having to take them off either the truck, the plane, or the rail, the barge, the ship today, and then put them on another mode of transport. So, can I, integrate yard management? Can I integrate sort of cargo freight storage and, break bulk capabilities? Can I, integrate cross-docking capabilities? And this is where the TMS and in traditional WMS type of environments, start to merge, because, and convergence starts to play in. And then think, if you're global, how do I integrate into that TMS requirement my cross-border customs and compliance, my legislative requirements, because everything that TMS is about is driven by somebody placing an order to receive goods or ship goods, right? So again, if you're inter-country or truly global, that customs and compliance is a big part of being able to move those goods. And again, you might have the best system, coming up with the best plan and executing the best plan with the best transport companies out there and carriers out there. But if you run into a problem with, a customs declaration, have the fastest truck in the world, it's not going to move an inch until customs gives you the ability to move those goods. So, we see today companies going out, they're looking for those capabilities in a TMS, multimodal, broad carrier network, global carrier network, freight matching capabilities, planning capabilities, optimization, either automatic or, business rule driven, sometimes, meets the requirements for many businesses. And then having the ability to connect those other value-added capabilities of customs compliance, the warehouse capabilities, etc. That, I think, is where the real benefit lies in a business, in being able to have a solution set that enables me to do all of those things in a connected and dynamic way as the business changes and grows.
Certainly some great food for thought there, Evan, for folks that are in the process of evaluating or reevaluating their TMS requirements. Well, like I always say, at the end of every episode, we always manage just to scratch the surface on this topic. And like I said, at the onset, this was something that a conversation that really began last year. I expect to see more and more conversation takes place this year in terms of rethinking what a TMS is and what the capabilities are. But certainly we covered some great, starting points today. So thank you again, Evan, for making the time, for being with us today.
Adrian, thanks very much for hosting the conversation. It's always great to bounce some of these ideas around with, people like yourself in the industry who have a broad view. Sometimes we get a little bit lost in our own world about what we do and what we think we can do with our systems. And so it's great to always share our perspective, and hopefully we'll get some great feedback, from anyone who watches this, that'll help all of us, continue to improve and add value, and ultimately deliver for that end consumer, because that's what keeps all of us in business today. So thanks very much, for taking the time to talk with us today.
Absolutely. And to that point, thank you to all of us who joined us today. And if you are watching this episode on demand, to Evan's point, if you have a question or a comment for Evan, feel free to, find the episode on talkinglogistics.com and post your question or comment there. And I'm sure Evan will be more than happy to respond via that medium. So again, thank you very much for joining us today, and have a great day.
Thanks, Adrian. We look forward to speaking again soon. Bye-bye.